My family, like most Americans in 1972, was a car trip kind of family. In 1965, only 20% of Americans had flown in an airplane. The reason was simple. Flying in those pre-deregulation days was too expensive. The government, through the Civil Aeronautics Board, or CAB, set and regulated fares. In 1974, it was actually illegal for an airline to charge less than the CAB-dictated $1,442 in inflation-adjusted dollars for a flight between New York and LA. That was one reason why every summer, my parents, my brother, and I piled into our green Chevy station wagon and left Rhode Island, where we'd moved when I was in first grade, for places like Amish country or Hershey in Pennsylvania or Niagara Falls. Most of these trips were actually just stopovers on the way to visit my father's relatives in Greensburg, Indiana, a small town in the southeastern corner of the state, filled with corn, fried chicken, and cousins. In 1967, we booked a week stay at Expo 67 in Montreal, a kind of World's Fair built on an island in the St. Lawrence River. To me, this was even more exciting than the free kisses in Hershey or the shoe-fly pie in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. For one thing, Canada was another country. I would actually be somewhere outside the United States, albeit much closer to Rhode Island than Disneyland. For another, I was still upset that my parents had refused to take us to the 1964 World's Fair in New York. Too crowded, my mother said every time I begged them to take us. The traffic, my father said. But I had seen pictures of it in the magazines and newspapers that came to our house. Picture phones, a robot Abraham Lincoln reciting the Gettysburg Address, and a ride in a boat through canals lined with animatronic dolls dressed in traditional outfits from around the world, dancing and spinning as they sang It's a Small World. And I had wanted to see it all for myself, but there was no convincing my parents. 3 years later, we were headed to Canada and Expo 67. Expo 67 had more than 90 pavilions, a geodesic dome, a biosphere, and a sleek glass and metal exhibit built by the USSR, which featured a bust of Lenin and a replica of the satellite that had carried Yuri Gagarin, the first person who went to space. Not as exciting as watching a life-size robotic Lincoln give a speech, but still exciting to me. Other than how expensive flying was, another reason that we always took car trips was that my mother, who had flown exactly twice, both times in a Navy cargo plane to and from Naples, Italy, where my father was stationed in the early 50s, hated flying. She was terrified of being thousands of feet in the air and reportedly kept her eyes closed for most of the time. My mother was afraid of many things, probably because of her older sister's sudden death from an allergic reaction to anesthesia a decade earlier, when Mom was 21 and Anne, my namesake, was 23. There were no grief support groups or grief counseling then, so my mother had to navigate her grief and her fear of catastrophes alone. Only 2 years a bride when her sister died, and with a baby son, she had to meet my father in Italy, flying for the first time alone with a toddler, leaving her bereaved family behind and establishing a lifelong dislike of airplanes and a nagging fear that at any moment something could go terribly wrong.